Welcome to Real Life. We have some incredible real life stories for you today. On March 29th, Sheila made a decision that she would come to regret for the rest of her life. After making that decision, she became consumed with death. Here's Sheila's story.
When I went off to college, it was a totally different environment than what I had been in before. So I had this newfound freedom, and I met this guy who was really cute, lots of fun. And I knew he wasn't like the guys I had dated before. So it was kind of like I packed God up in this little box, and I put him on a shelf, and I said, I'll come back for you later. And so I went off and I had fun, and it was great, and everything was good. And then, I just started making decisions that went against what I knew to be right. And about 1.5 years into that relationship, I ended up pregnant. And I couldn't believe it, even though, we were having unprotected sex. I knew that that could happen, but I went through this process of just trying to figure out what is it I'm going to do now. So I sought advice from a friend who said, oh, abortion's easy. I had one at 15. It's no big deal. Nobody will have to find out your secret. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, because I knew that if I go and I just get rid of this problem, because that's the only way I was looking at it, is if I just go get rid of this problem, everything will be solved and we can get back to our fun life we were having. And so I kept justifying this thought of having an abortion by thinking the Supreme Court justices are much smarter than me. They must know something that I don't. And so it's okay to have an abortion, or they wouldn't have made it legal. That's how I kept justifying this decision. And so I made the appointment against his wishes. I was thinking very selfishly, but I made the appointment. I left that day, and I'll never forget the image of him in my mind. He was crying on my front porch, begging me not to go, and I went anyway. And it was a horrible, horrible day. It was March 29th, 1985. I'll never forget that date. I went and I had that abortion, and it was easily the most regrettable mistake of my life. And so I went through with it. It was excruciatingly painful. And I remember leaving that day and just thinking, okay, I've just got to put this behind me. That was horrible, but now I can just get back to life. And for a few days, I felt relief. I would look down at my stomach and think, I don't ever have to tell my dad. I don't ever have to tell anyone that I was pregnant at one time. I can just get back to life. And little did I know that had just opened up a can of worms I would never be able to close. I went through the next 2 weeks trying to get back to life as normal with my boyfriend, and he really couldn't stand the sight of me. And looking back on that now, I don't blame him. Abortion hurts men just as much as it hurts women. So he broke up with me 2 weeks later. I was devastated, of course. I can't believe I wasn't shocked by that, but I felt very rejected. And I knew it was like the realization of what I did hit me that day, because I knew if he rejected me, that if I ever tell anybody else for the rest of my life about what I did on March 29th, that they'll reject me like he did. And so I buried that secret so deeply inside of me, and was just determined that no one was ever going to find that out. So for the next 7 years, I just lived this life of complete and utter chaos. It was total hell on earth, the way I started living after that. Because for one, I made sure nobody would keep my secret, but I had to keep my conscience numb somehow so I didn't think about what I had done. I began to take drugs, I began to drink, I began to just date men who were horrible, bad for me. I was in relationship after relationship. It was just a very, very bleak existence that I started into, because I knew if the drugs wear off, if I come down, if I get sober, then I'll have to realize what I did. And so I knew that I would never be free from this. It was something that was going to be on my record for the rest of my life. And I knew the only way to get out of it was to end my life. And so I started contemplating that. I planned the day, I planned the method. I was living with my stepsister at the time. We shared an apartment. And I knew that she kept a pistol in her nightstand drawer. And so I went to work that day and I faked being sick. I told everybody I was sick and that I needed to go home. And as I went home, I drove down those roads. This is a very dark day for me, and I always cry. But I remember driving down the road and just realizing this is the last time I'm going to do this. It's the last time I'm going to do that. And it was just a surreal moment. But I came home and I got the pistol out of her nightstand drawer. I sat down on the edge of that couch and I turned that pistol around. And I put the barrel of the gun right between my eyes, and I remember being so afraid, so I didn't want to pull the trigger, but I knew that I had to. And so I put my thumbs on the trigger, and I just started pulling very slowly and thought, okay, I won't know when the bullet releases. I can just do it and not consciously do it. And so I remember sitting there and being leaned over and with that gun right between my eyes, and I remember just seeing my tears hit in the dust and knowing that any moment this is going to be over and I'm not going to have to live with this anymore, because I knew all that I was suffering stemmed from that abortion. I was saying, just do it, just do it. And so I started pulling that trigger very slowly. Suddenly, I heard wheels on the gravel outside my apartment as I sat in that position, and nobody was supposed to be home. It was the middle of the day. So I ran to the window, and it was my stepsister home in the middle of the day. She wasn't due for hours, and as I looked out the window down at her car, it was literally the first time I had thought, what would this have done to her had she walked in and saw me like that? I loved her. So I ran and put her gun back before she even came in the house. I jumped in the bed. She said, what are you doing home? I said, I'm sick. She said, she's sick too. And so she went to bed, and I laid there the rest of the day thinking, okay, now what do I do? I had no plan past that day. I knew everything was going to be over. As I was living through this 7 years, I met this guy in a bar, and he was just the greatest guy. He was so nice, and he loved me. He started pursuing me, and I couldn't believe it because I always dated these guys who were losers. And so to have this guy interested in me, it gave me hope again and made me think, okay, maybe I am worth something after all. And so I cleaned myself up enough to get married. We had 2 children right away. My second son was actually born on March 29th. I mean, it was like all of these things God was pulling back into my life. That God that I had boxed up and put on a shelf and said, I'll be back for you later in college, now was bringing this love that I didn't deserve back into my life. But having that first child, my first son, was the most incredible experience of my life. It made me get off drugs. It made me stop drinking. I totally straightened up my life because I thought, okay, I have another person to be living for now. And plus my husband loved me. And so it was just this love came into my life that I knew I did not deserve. But I had finally told him of my abortion, but we didn't know what to do about it. We were still trying to figure it out on human terms, and we could not figure it out. And so I was driving down the road one day with my boys and heard a commercial on the radio of a pregnancy center who was offering a class for women who had had an abortion and were having trouble afterward. And the way I remember it, of course, it's like angels were singing and lights were shining on my car, and it was the most amazing discovery because I thought I was the only one that ever suffered after an abortion. Because in society, they tell you as a woman that it's your right to choose, and it was good for you, and we don't want to go back to the Stone Age. So what I was experiencing was not computing with what society was telling me. So to hear that there was this class was amazing. So I finally went to this Bible study, and through these women being the conduit for Jesus' love and forgiveness and mercy and grace It was absolutely amazing. They were there to hold my hand and reconnect me with the God of my youth, and it was the most incredible experience because He just came in and through this Bible study, just being able to find those scriptures that you can apply to that gaping wound of abortion was absolutely amazing. God's Word is what heals this unbelievable wound that abortion leaves you with. It's the only thing that can heal you from that type of wound. So going through this study, working through the guilt and the shame and the regret of an abortion, finally drew a line in the sand and made me allow Jesus to come in and heal me. I had asked Him every day for forgiveness for 7 years. I had asked Him thousands of times for forgiveness, but it was finding that forgiveness for myself that I needed to find. And really all that is just allowing God's forgiveness to be enough. So being able to go through that study and allowing Jesus to come back into my life and heal me was the greatest discovery of all. When you go from such a dark place and then you open yourself and say, okay, is God's grace really there for me? Is it really going to work? And then when you see that it really does, you just have to allow Him to work in your life. It's absolutely amazing.
After watching Sheila's story, I'm sure you saw that she found herself at a place of utter darkness, and perhaps you're at that place as well. Maybe you're ready to let go of that darkness and receive the help and the healing that's available from Jesus Christ. The real life stories that we bring to you because there is hope, there is forgiveness in Jesus Christ. As you reach out by faith, God will reach out to you and will bring you hope and healing, just like He brought to Sheila. Sheila Harper is the founder and president of Save One, an international outreach ministry for men and women suffering in silence after an abortion. For more information, go to SaveOne.org.
Through Save One, we are ending abortion. We're not fighting abortion, we're ending abortion. And that's how we're going to end abortion in our country, is by having these women and now men out telling their stories of the truth of what happens to you when you choose abortion. So as I started seeing Save One develop and seeing that God is wanting to do more than just this be a little Bible study I teach in my church, which was my thinking, like this is all it's ever going to be. He led me to write my first book, which is Save One, An Emotional Guide to Healing After Abortion. So that's the women's study. And then as we started having success with the women's study, men started asking to go through the women's class. That's how badly they were hurting. We're now 170 chapters in 14 countries around the world. That very first book that I wrote that I thought was just going to be used in my church. Don't ever put God in a box. It's not a good place for Him to be. He has taken it now and it's been translated into 10 different languages. We're building the kingdom. We're building God's kingdom by ending abortion, by talking about His grace and mercy and love and forgiveness over the sin of abortion.
I know that I don't bring a lot to the table, just little pieces of a broken heart. There's days I wonder if you'll still be faithful, hold me together when I fall apart. Would you remind me now of who you are, that your love will never change, that there's healing in your name, and you can take broken things and make them beautiful. You took my shame and you walked out of the grave, so your love takes broken things and makes them beautiful. Oh, oh, and makes them beautiful. Oh, oh, you make them beautiful. Oh, I'm better off when I begin to remember how you have met me in my deepest pain. So give me glimpses now of how you have covered all of my heartache. Go with all your grace. Remind me now that you can make a way, that your love will never change, that there's healing in your name, and you can take broken things and make them beautiful. You took my shame and you walked out of the grave, so your love takes broken things and makes them beautiful. Oh, oh, and makes them beautiful. Oh, oh, you make them beautiful. You say that you'll turn my weeping into dancing, remove my sadness and cover me with joy. You say your scars are the evidence of healing. You can make the broken beautiful. 'Cause your love will never change, and there's healing in your name. You can take broken things and make them beautiful. You took my shame and you walked out of the grave, so your love takes broken things and makes them beautiful. Oh, oh, it makes them beautiful. Oh, oh, it makes them beautiful. Oh, oh, it makes us beautiful. Oh, oh, you make us beautiful. Oh.
Hello and welcome back to Real Life. When Doug's girlfriend became pregnant, he encouraged her to have an abortion. He had no idea at that time that that would be a decision that would haunt him for years.
My senior year in high school, I was an exchange student to Germany, and one of the things that I fell in love with besides the culture was a young lady who came over and eventually became my first wife. We had opportunity during our relationship to be faced with a decision when she told me that she was pregnant. We were two young, not even 20-somethings, and we decided that we were going to go through with an abortion procedure. And so I took her to the clinic and was with her in the room during that procedure. I remember all the things that happened and seeing how that is done. And then I think it was one of those things that both of us kind of put out of our minds and didn't really talk about for a long time. Eventually, after the marriage had ended, I came to find out that she was not able to have children, and to this day has not had the opportunity to have a child. That child was to be her child. And to now have the opportunity to say that this is in my past, and while I'm not proud of it, I know that there is forgiveness, and I know that a lot of men carry a lot of weight over this. And I just hope that as more men share their stories, that it would help soften the hearts of so many guys to be able to accept the forgiveness, to be able to remove this wedge that's got to be there in their relationship with other men, with their wives, with their families. I think it's important to share my story and for other men to share their stories to remind us all, especially our churches, that a lot of people are dealing with this, and that the room for judgment, the room for shunning is not there. There needs to be an embrace. There needs to be an understanding of this is something that I've carried around with me, but this is something that God's going to forgive, and that we are able to heal the next generation, that we'll be able to impart to our kids and to our grandkids the value of life, the importance of following God's way as the best way.
When you have experienced abortion, you can be affected immediately, or you can go years without symptoms working their way to the surface. It's guilt, it's shame, it's overachievement, broken relationships, inability to hold down a job. There are so many different kinds and ways people experience this kind of grief that you can't pinpoint it, but it's a loss that is secret. It's a loss that many suffer by themselves in silence, but it will interrupt your life in all kinds of different ways. Abortion is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. You're in a situation where you feel it's hopeless and that you need to find an easy way out where no one will know and it'll solve the problem. The problems that are created far outweigh what problems you think a baby will bring. And a baby is a blessed gift from God and will bring more joy into your life, the rest of your life, than you can ever imagine. But to find real healing, Christ is the only way. And I've seen miraculous transformation after a woman will go or a man will go through a post-abortion Bible study.
If you would like to share your abortion-related story, please contact us through our website, www.reallifetv.life, or through our Facebook page, Real Life CTN. If you need help in dealing with either an unplanned pregnancy or regret from a past abortion, please contact the H3 helpline at 866-721-7881.
In high school, as a teenager, I had very low self-confidence, low self-esteem. I certainly wasn't one that had the trendy new clothes. I never considered myself very pretty. Nobody ever told me that I was pretty. As all young women and young men do, your bodies kind of start to grow and you become more of a woman. And so that seemed to bring some attention. And I was confused by the attention, thinking that it might possibly equal love. I was very much looking for love, for that affirmation. I was looking for love in all the wrong places and thinking that a young teenage boy might be emotionally mature to give back the kind of love that I was desperately searching for and acceptance. That started me in a pattern of trying to fill that void, of looking for love, looking for that affirmation.
Sheryl continued in her sexual relationships, hoping to find love and affirmation, but she found herself pregnant.
So my mom and stepdad were suspicious, and my mom decided she wanted me to go and see her doctor. So I went and had some tests done, and a couple days later the nurse called to speak to me, and as I answered the phone I kept thinking, I hope it's a no, I hope it's a no. And she said, Sheryl, the test is positive. And so I gave the phone to my mom, and they spoke for a few moments, and then she hung up and she said, abortion is the only option. And so I didn't feel I had a choice. I remember wanting to scream no when they put the mask over me and not having the courage. And then waking up and the nurse patting my arm and saying, it's okay, everything is great now. And then once we went home, I laid on the couch for the rest of the day, but nobody said anything. We never talked about it again. And I just did a good job at pretending things didn't happen. And in my own quiet time, in bed at night, I would cry. I would plead with God, even though at that time I didn't. I believed in God, but I did not have a relationship with God. I would beg for forgiveness. I felt so guilty and so ashamed and sad. And I was also struggling with anger. I was angry that I wasn't really given a choice. And even though they told me it was not a baby, it's just a mass of cells, I didn't believe them.
Sheryl fell in love with a young man that swept her off her feet, so they decided to get married.
A couple months into the marriage, I did something. I made a choice. I decided to get off my birth control pills because I wanted a baby. I wanted my baby back that I had aborted several years earlier that he knew nothing about. When I told him, he was not happy. He was angry, and he said he's not ready to be a father, and this is not what he wanted. Now, he never told me if I didn't get an abortion, he would leave me. He never gave me ultimatums. He just kept telling me, I'm not ready, I don't want to do this, and that abortion is an option. And so when I told my mom and my stepdad, they agreed with him. And because he didn't know about the first one, I know that he didn't realize the impact that it had had on me. And what made it harder was that I planned for this baby. I wanted this baby. And I found myself once again doing things that other people wanted me to do to make them happy. I was 18 at this point and going for my second abortion. I remember just being devastated and thinking, God, can you forgive me twice? Can you forgive me twice? I felt so much guilt. I just felt like, I talk about the scarlet cord around my neck. I just felt like it was heavier and heavier. And I knew I needed help.
Sheryl's healing began after she discovered the truth in God's Word.
It opened my eyes to God's words in, 1 John 1:9, if you just confess your sins. See, that was what it was for me. It was just that whole confession. And I just started realizing how deep God's love is for me. What has got me through is a solid relationship with Christ, getting into the Word, believing those scriptures are for me, and writing them on all over the place, and having those visual reminders, sharing my story, not because I'm proud. I am not proud of my story, but I share it because I know what bondage it keeps women in. What I have found out in just talking with other women is that secret, that shame, it hinders relationships. Your marriage suffers because there's a block in intimacy there. But most importantly, understanding that there's nothing in the scriptures that say this forgiveness is only for. You cannot have this forgiveness or this grace or this redemption if you have had an abortion, if you are an alcoholic, if you've stolen things. There's none of that. So I had to embrace that. You have to believe it with your whole heart and live it out. And that's the only way that I can do this. God's forgiveness and grace means everything to me. It's the only way that I can move forward. So I hold on to God's grace and His promises, and I know that I am forgiven.
Thanks for joining us on Real Life. The stories that you've watched today are all real. Better still, the hope and the healing that's available for your life is also real. Please take a moment and contact the website information on the screen and be ready to take your next step of freedom right now. We'll see you next time on Real Life.